in this masterclass, we're going to be building agent number 15. This is the last agent, and it's probably the most challenging agent in the lineup here. That's for good reason because it uh, is supposed to have you work through all of the skills, these foundational skills that we've learned, which is uh, prompting, it's iterating through data, and pulling from like using variables properly in each of our blocks. We're going to be going through this build step by step, and unlike other master classes where we kind of hold questions till the end, what we're going to do here is if you have a question at any point while we're building, and as long as it's related to what we're building, feel free to raise your hand or just say, "Hey, Luis, pause for a second and explain this specific thing." Does that sound good with everyone? Okay, cool. So the first thing that I like to do when I'm building agents, right, is either prepare a quick spec or take a look at a spec that's given to you and kind of figure out like what things we're going to need in this agent. So in this case, we get asked like what we have to ask the user something. That's easy, user input. We need to gather additional context. In this case, we have a little hint that says use this user context block, so that's easy. Based on topic provided, refine topic details and generate JSON for queries. Okay, so this is a generate text block. We kind of go through each of these things. And this agent's going to take all this context, make some queries, go through each query, search Google, scrape those results, and get like a nice JSON um, report, basically a structured outline of our research report. And then we're going to generate an image for the sections generated. We're going to combine, we're going to have a bunch of data in two separate places. We're going to be able to combine that data into one single JSON object that we can then run through a generate asset block. And then we're going to display all of that. And we have this little bonus here at the bottom, which is it should list out all of the source URLs um, that we scraped for our research. So I'm going to be bouncing back and forth between this page and then just a new agent page as we begin to build this out. So first thing is let's just quickly tackle these first couple, which is let's gather all of the context we need. We need to ask someone what they want to research and gather this extra context via the user context block. So this is super easy, right? We're going to add a user input here, and then this user input is going to have an input inside of it. We can make it short text, and we're going to call this the topic, and we can say, what do you want to research? And we have that done. And then the next thing is we need to use this user context block, which we didn't quite explain how to use, but once you take a look at the block, it becomes much more self-explanatory. So basically what this block does is it uses AI to basically interview the user and gather this additional context, right? And so this prompt here is an AI prompt that explains what we are looking to gather, right? And so we need to provide it with the proper context. So let me go ahead and zoom in just so that we can see a little bit better. So in order to do that, we're going to include the topic in these tags. Okay. And then we will provide it with some instructions. And in this case, we want to refine the topic, kind of double click into whatever topic the user provides. We can use a prompt, something like help the user refine the topic that they'd like to research, and then gather more context, maybe gather more contextual info in order to perform a full research report on the topic provided. And one thing that we should actually, this is a good technique that if you're not doing it, I recommend you start doing it in your prompts, is you can actually take this tag and you can use it in your prompting as well. And it helps to identify, hey, we're referencing this this thing that's in the tag here, whatever's inside of these tags. We only need to really provide it once. We could put it here as well, but I'm just going to leave it as is. And this user context block has a couple of other configurations. The interview depth basically asks it how detailed to be. Uh, yeah, Prasanna, I see you have your hand raised.
Thanks, Luis. So if I put it multiple times, the word topic, will it increase the size of the token?
No, it shouldn't, because what we're doing is simply like it's not the same as doing something like these double curly braces. Like you're not actually replacing the text
Oh,
here. What
okay,
you're
okay.
doing is just referencing this because we've tagged it at the top. So we could, you know, it might increase like one token, maybe.
Oh,
It's not, but it's not including the entire text of the topic because that's already included up at the top. Okay, so we have these configurations. We can, if we read the help text, we can see this specifies the level of context gathering. So it essentially determines how detailed these interview questions are going to be. Um, because I like to keep kind of the user experience for this agent pretty lightweight. I want to be able to move through these additional questions quickly. And so I keep this at quick and I have the max questions, five is probably fine. I think eight is good. You can go all the way to 100 questions if you wanted to, but just keep in mind it at a certain point it becomes kind of a slog to answer 100 questions. And even sometimes when I was using the generate asset helper before I updated it, I was like, man, like just keeps asking me questions about this web page, and I'm like, you could just do it, AI. Like you got this, and not have to answer any more questions. So I like to keep this really lightweight. We're going to give this a variable name, and I'm going to call this topic details. And this is the context that we're gathering before we generate all of the queries. So going back into our spec, we've got this first one, check. We've got the second one, check. Let's move on to this next step, which is using the topic details and the current date, which is a special variable inside of MindStudio. We want to generate a JSON array of search queries, and we want to make sure that those queries are diverse enough. So what we're going to do here, this is just generating some text. We're going to use a generate text block, and we're going to want to include all of this contextual information. So I'm going to create some nested tags here. And what I mean by nested tags is you can have a tag called um, we'll call this something like user research requirements. Let me just go ahead and you can kind of call this whatever you want, whatever makes sense to you and your prompting style. And inside of this, we can include other tags. And so this is a technique that's also really useful if you're wanting to reference, multiple documents, for example. Like if you could have a tag called documents, and then inside you can nest these other tags, like document one, close those tags, document two, close those tags, but you kind of encapsulate all of it in this kind of this larger tag called documents. And in our case, it's user research requirements. So I'm going to provide the topic like we did before. And you don't have to indent either. I just like it because it helps me kind of see the structure of this a bit more, but it's totally fine to not use this indentation. the AI doesn't care either way. Then we have our topic details. Details. Okay, perfect. And let's quickly, 1 second, Sandy, I see your hand raised. Let me just finish this one thought here. And we have a current date. And in MindStudio, there is this variable that always exists within projects, and it's called current date. If you use those double curly braces, you'll find current date in this list here. And that we're just going to use to ensure that it's pulling, kind of recent articles. So if you're researching something that's more topical, it doesn't go to an article from like several years ago. Okay, Sandy, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, just a quick question, because you said you don't have to indent this, but what are the things that you actually do need a space for? Because I noticed when I was doing stuff in JSON, sometimes I would put the dash and no space, sometimes a dash and a space, and I'm not sure which is right and if it makes a difference at all.
Yeah, for sure. We'll when we get to the actual JSON,
Okay,
I'll make sure to go and explain that.
thank you.
One thing is like this is not JSON at all.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is
no.
just like think of it more as like kind of almost like an outline, where you just have bullets and then you can have sub bullets and things like that. So this in the AI prompt, you don't have to indent if you don't want to. I just
Yeah, it
like
just reminded me about the other part.
yeah, we'll
All
get
right,
to
thank.
it. Yeah, for sure. And then one thing also I just noticed this is make sure you're using those opening and closing tags so that we can reference these things properly. Um, so now we can go ahead and write the prompt. And what's going to become super useful for folks is using this expand tool, this edit in full screen. And mostly because it's now centered, we have a little bit more space to write our prompt. Um, and in this case, we want, it said, a JSON array of search queries. So why don't we go ahead and we will save this output schema as JSON, and we want the output format. Oh, nope, we don't want output format. We're going to save to a variable here. The output schema is going to be JSON, and we get this sample output that we can type in here. So before we add the prompt, let's just add the sample output. This one's going to be super easy. It's just an array, right? And we know that the array uh, sorry, I'm trying to zoom in. But the array is these square brackets. So we know that that's an array, and an array has items of the same type inside of it. And in this case, we don't need any objects. All we need are just plain old strings. And a string is just some text, right? These are going to be our search queries. So we're going to type in, uh, just give it some examples, query 1, query 2, query 3. Oh, and we got to make sure that all this is in quotations. And I'm going to only pull 3 queries. If you want to include more than 3 queries, you could just make sure it's inside of your prompt. I also noticed that somebody had typed in chat, and I don't know if this is, I haven't verified this myself. I have been tending to use this dot 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 at the end of this sample JSON. If you include this in real JSON, it's not valid, but because this is a sample, the idea is that the AI will interpret this as being as meaning I want more than just these 3. But again, if you just have this, this is also totally valid as well. And it'll typically be able to do it without those dot dot dots. Okay, so
Yeah,
we
I have
have
a,
the strung.
sorry, can I ask a question here? So you
Yeah.
just, you had a trailing comma there. Would that have generated an error? But you took it away right after query 3.
So what I did here is I had a comma and then I had dot dot dot.
Okay,
To kind of
okay,
indicate that I wanted more.
right.
And if you have a trailing comma, this is a sample output. So this is not JSON that you'd read through. This is essentially part of the AI prompt. And lucky for us, the AI models are really good with dealing with this kind of ambiguity. So if you include an accidental trailing comma, even though it's bad practice, because it's in this generate text block and it's essentially part of the AI prompt, the AI model will most likely be able to create the regular valid JSON for us. But this is definitely a place where it could make something that you don't want. And so it's always good to just whenever you can give it the sample that is using good practices.
Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Persona?
So Louis, are you saying that if I want only three, then I just give query 1, 2, and 3, and comma dot 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 means grab everything? Is that the interpretation of that the text what you gave?
So in this case, we are you
I know this is
no,
just a
it's
sample, but
going
what does three really mean? Just give me three, right? Is that what it means?
we're just providing a sample of the structure of the JSON here.
Uh,
It's not really where we actually get the number of queries from is inside of the prompt, which we haven't written
Okay.
yet.
Okay.
Uh, in this case, I just have query 1, query 2, query 3 because I don't know, just like 3 just feels like a good amount to put in here,
Okay.
right?
Thank
But
you.
it
Thank you.
it
Yeah.
probably would be valid if I just had query 1, query 2 in here. Um, but since we're only
Yeah.
pulling 3, it's better just to have the third one in here.
Thank you.
Okay, so any feeling good about how this generate text block is prompting, how it's outputting the JSON. Good. Okay, let's go ahead and finish up the prompt in here. So we're gonna say based on the info above, generate an array of 3 search queries for Google that would help us research the topic. And then we can say make sure the queries are diverse enough so that we get different search results. Okay. And one thing that you'll notice that might be a little different than how you are building is I have my default model for my workspace as Gemini 2.5 Flash, right? The reason I do this is because Gemini 2.5 Flash has a context window of 1 million tokens. It's relatively cost efficient. In fact, it's more cost effective than Claude 3.5 Haiku. And I find its outputs to be pretty good. Rich, I'll get to you in just a second. Just want to finish this thought really quick. If you want to change the default model, you can go into Workspace, go under Settings, and you can find that setting here, right, for your default model. And that way it'll save you some time down the road as you're building if you're wanting to use a specific model each time you run a generate text block or something like that. So yours might say Haiku 3.5, just in case you're wondering why this wasn't like that by default. That's the reason why. Yes, Rich.
I'm trying to build this as fast as you are, and when I got to the generate text prompt and was putting in this page, when I expanded it, I have prompt, but I don't have system structured output option. I deleted the generate text block, I created a new one, and I still can only see prompt. What am I doing wrong?
Yeah, good question. So let's add another generate text block. And then let's expand this, and you'll notice that I don't have that prompt up here right now. The way that we get the structured output is we need to do two things. One is we need to make sure that we're saving it to a variable. And then the other thing is we need to make sure our output schema is set to JSON or CSV. And that will enable this structured output tab to appear here.
I didn't catch the change in the output schema, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. It's basically intended to, like, if you have it as text, there's no structure to the output needed. So we just removed the tab entirely. Sandy?
Yeah, quick question. I guess, Rich, you probably don't make as many mistakes as I made because I found all this out by just pushing things. My question is, do you have to use the same model in each of the sub workflows or each generate text block, or does it not make any difference?
Um, you can choose to use whatever model you want to use for any task as you're building your AI agents. Um, my model of choice for this build is Gemini 2.5 Flash for some tasks and Gemini 2.5 Pro for more reasoning intensive tasks. But again, like you might run into down the line as you build this agent, we're dealing with large amounts of data. So just be conscious of the context window and what you're actually able to put through the AI model. Because if you're scraping a bunch of web content and putting that all together, you might actually exceed more than 200,000 tokens for a single uh, a single generate text block, and that'll error out your agent. So that's why I've been prioritizing these two. There are obviously other models that handle large context windows. In fact, uh, I think we're able to actually sort by this. Maybe hold on, let me
Oh,
zoom
cool.
out.
But you can use different models in the same workflow. Like
Yeah,
in,
yeah,
okay,
100%.
that was
Yeah.
my question. Yeah, okay.
Okay.
I got an error message using Gemini Flash, so I changed it.
Okay. Yeah, well, hopefully if that happens here, I might change it too. Really, like the idea is the other thing to know is like sometimes it's not your fault. Like these model providers will have issues themselves, right? Sometimes the power goes out in my neighborhood when it's
I know y'all
120
still that
degrees
still a
outside.
lot of fucking work to do. List like, ooh.
Oh, Brandy, I'm gonna mute you. Sorry. Um,
Yeah, can I
and
just, sorry,
oh
I
yeah,
can
go
chirp
ahead.
up. Yeah, I can chirp up on this one because I had a disastrous number 15 build, and it really turned out to be an Anthropic issue. And when I checked later, they indeed were down. Like even like blocks like the generate asset or block wasn't working properly, and then at the time, I went and changed it to a bunch of GPTs, OpenAI models that had large context, and then it worked. So it's called
Yeah.
light in the high tech world.
Yeah, we're kind of at the mercy of these model providers for if you're using specific blocks that use those specific models. One good way to just double check if you're getting like something that says like LLM error or something like that, it's usually indicative that a model provider service is down. And so if you just type in Google, type in, like Anthropic, I already, you see I have it on quick. I don't even have to type Anthropic all the way. It's already here, but there's this site called Status. You could just type in the provider and status into Google and you will be able to find whether or not the models themselves are operational. So here you can see we use API, this thing here. So you can see on the 21st of August, which may have been the same time, may or may not have been the same time when Mark was working on his build, this was down, right? It had a partial outage for certain Claude models. So just a good thing to note as you're building is like sometimes you have it built correctly and it's just the model. But always feel free to ask. That's also important.
It
Okay.
did, it did say in when I generated the insights in the debugger, it did tell me it was the model. So
Oh,
sometimes that
okay.
happens too.
Great. Yeah, it knows then. That's awesome. Okay, so we have finished our generate text block here. The other thing is as we start to build this agent out, we're gonna have a lot of blocks in here. So I am going to rename this block just to keep organized. and I'm going to rename it to be called generate queries. And then the other thing I think I forgot to add was this variable name here. What we're going to save these queries as, we're just going to call it queries. So these are all of our search queries. Now we're going to dive into building out our next step, which is we want to iterate through the list of queries. And for each query, run a sub workflow that searches Google, iterates through search results, and then for each result, scrape the URL and then return all of that content back up. So we're going to go, we know that we want to iterate through a list, and we know that the best way to do that is via a run workflow block. So I'm going to add a run workflow block, and that's going to help us iterate through. Now you'll notice that I can't select any workflow, and that's because the only workflow I've created is my main workflow here. So we actually have to create the workflow, and this workflow is going to search Google, and then for each of the results, scrape a URL, basically iterate through the return from that Google search. So I kind of described this in the video as inception a little bit, but we're going to add these two steps in. So one is going to be search Google. Luckily, we have a block for that called the search Google block. And then we know at some point we want to iterate through those results, each of those results. So I'm going to add another run workflow block, and we'll tackle this later. We don't need to worry about it, but we know that we want to iterate at some point through the results. So I'm just going to leave that there. Okay. So we have this sub workflow created. And again, just to stay organized, we want to rename this, and I'll call this sub research. And I think I numbered them in the video, sub 1 research. Is this what you were getting, by the way, these dot, dot, dots? That might look familiar. Anyway, when we have a sub workflow, particularly when we have a run workflow block, the sub workflow needs to be set up to be run inside of the run workflow block in the parent workflow. And that requires two things. It requires some launch variables in the start block, and it requires us to create a JSON output at the end of the block. So in this case, we're going to be iterating through this list of queries, right? And why don't we go ahead and click on that main run workflow block and just start selecting the sub research flow. We know we're going to want to run it multiple times, and we're going to have our input data be the queries from the previous step. So let's go ahead and put the queries in. In this case, I'm going to use this JSON array input because it's more precise. We've covered in previous masterclasses that you can use auto extract and use AI to extract values, but I wouldn't recommend doing this because we already have the structure, we already have that structured output. So make sure you're using this JSON array input as the iterator. And our input array is this queries array that's going to generate here. So here we know we need to set up a couple of things. We even have a warning that says the selected workflow is not configured to return any results. So why don't we go ahead and we can assign a couple of things. We can assign the output of this block, and we can assign the launch variables that we're going to pass through. So if we add a launch variable here, actually, let me back up. It's easier to set it up in the sub workflow. So let's add, we want to run one query from this queries list into the sub workflow each time we run it. So we're going to add a launch variable that we are going to call query. And then we're going to output uh, the result of all of these run workflow blocks here. So in this case, we haven't set this up yet. So we're going to, for now, we'll just put in, we'll put in output. And then for the value, we'll put in something like you still need to edit this, just for our own personal sanity. Okay, so now we have this set up here. We know that the output, we know that the launch variables that we set up is an individual query. And if we were to run this generate queries block, are we still feeling good about items and list, like JSON, iterating through JSON using this item variable? Thumbs up if that rings a bell. Thumbs down if you want me to explain it. Okay, great. So we know that in the run workflow block, a single query from this sample output is just going to be an item on this list. And so we want to map this item to the query launch variable. So we're going to use item here because we know that's going to be one item in the list. Then we're going to have our output variable for this run workflow block, and we'll call this something like all research materials, because this block is going to be the result of every single query and every single scrape, and it's going to combine it all together at the end of this run workflow block. The other thing I'm going to do is modify the execution mode. I like to see it running in sequence. I don't want all these things running at the same time because there's a lot of kind of sub steps to it. You can kind of choose whichever one you want, parallel or sequential, but I find that in this case, sequential as I'm running through the debugger makes more sense. And then if something fails for some reason, I'm just going to ignore the failed run for now. I'm not even going to retry it. We'll keep this at 0 retry attempts. Okay, so we have this run workflow all set up. We can see we have an error here because we haven't set up the sub-research flow yet. And so we know that we're passing one query and mapping it to this launch variable called query. So we now have that query to use inside of this Google search block. So we can simply use that query variable. And keep in mind, it's not queries, plural. It's the launch variable that we set up in the start block. Query. There we go. And for our output variable in the Google search block, we want to, we can call this like Google results, whatever we want to call it. I can call it maybe like search result. And then for the format, let's also keep this structured so that we can iterate through it. We have this JSON here. So the other thing that might trip a lot of people up, that actually tripped me up in the video, is by default, this block will return 30 results. And that's way too much context for us to deal with. Like, we don't want to scrape all of that information and then have an AI summarize it. It'll just fail on us because it's just so much information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the amount of results from 30 down to 8, let's say. You know, you can use 10, you can use 8. I wouldn't go any higher than 10. If you are failing because your context is too big, this is a good area to also reduce. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so we have this search result coming in. And now, really quick, let's just see what happens. We're going to add a... Oh, actually, I'm not sure if you all saw this new feature that was dropped yesterday, but we have this new thing called breakpoints. So this would actually be a really good time to add a breakpoint. So we can add a breakpoint after. And what this is going to do is when we run it in the debugger, you'll see we can enter a query here and test things out. And I'm just going to say, you know, desert survival tips. I think I spelled that wrong, but that's okay. And we can see what we get back from this Google search block without continuing down the workflow. So we can see here, and that's what that breakpoints feature does. It will just stop at that point in the workflow, and so that you can see it in the debugger. So you can see here, this is the returned Google result, and each result that we want to iterate through has a title, it has a description, and it has a URL associated with it. So what we can do is now we can start setting up the this run workflow block now that we know what that workflow block does. And maybe now that we know we have run this one time, we can also utilize the feature and configure mock data here. So if we go and configure block data, we can see that we have the result, and we can save this as the result. Right? So now moving forward, when we're testing this out, we can simply hit save, and that's the results that we're getting from this block here. Let's
I've
remove
got
the
a question.
breakpoint. Yeah.
So is that instead of like before you were just creating a display content and then copying the variable in, is that exactly the same thing? Okay.
That is exactly right. Yeah.
Okay.
So it just saves you from having to save all of this into a display content block, and makes testing just a little bit easier, because now you're not trying to like reroute all this stuff like I did in the video in kind of like a convoluted way, where I was adding these display content blocks to create these breakpoints manually. Now that feature is just built into MindStudio so that it can make testing just a little bit easier. Is that breakpoints feature making sense, by the way? It dropped yesterday. So we're gonna try and take advantage of it. Okay, great. So now we're running this mock data through. We can now start building out our sub workflow here. You can see here we need to add a new workflow, and this workflow we can rename it maybe as a sub, 1.2 or whatever we want to call it. And this is just going to be scrape. And inside of this block, or excuse me, this workflow, all we want to do, if we look at our spec here, is for each result that comes back from the Google search, we want to iterate through that result, scrape the URL, and return the scraped content. So this workflow is actually super easy to build. All we need is a scrape URL block. We want to make sure that we are passing through the URL. So we're going to create a launch variable called URL, and we're going to have to map a value to this a little bit later. And then in the end block, what we want to return is the scraped content. So I'm going to have, I'm going to actually pass that URL back so that we get some structured data to it. And so we'll call this the URL, and we're just going to pass the value of that URL from our launch variable just back up the workflow. And then we're going to scrape the URL inside of the scrape URL block. So let's go ahead and use that URL that we created via the start block. And we'll save this as scraped content. And then you can fiddle around with all the scrape block settings. I keep it just as is, and I found it works fine for this build. But we want to be able to pass the scraped content as an output as well. So I'm just going to type in this property called content. And then as the value for that property, we're going to use that scraped content variable. So we're going 2 layers deep now, right? It's a little bit like Inception. We have the main workflow that gets the query. Then in the sub workflow, we have the one query and we get a bunch of Google results back. We send each individual result from Google into this this other sub workflow where we scrape and get the content of each of those individual URLs. And then we want to pass this info back up for that URL. So we're going to configure the run workflow block, run this multiple times. We know our input data is search result from the Google search queries. So we can include search result. And we also know, oh, sorry, I always forget to do this. But again, we want to make sure we're using this JSON array input. And so we know that the result is going to output this thing that has a title, description, and URL. And each of these things is one item from that list of results. And so to get the URL and to pass that URL down, what we're going to do is for our launch variable, we're going to utilize that dot notation. So we have the item, and then we know that it has a property called URL. So we're going to use item.url. You could also, again, like there's a lot of questions around, do I pass the whole object? Do I pass the whole item in? You can certainly pass the whole item in to this workflow, but then you need to make sure that you are you're using dot notation to pass the URL in here instead of, and what I'm doing is I'm just saying, oh, I just want the URL. So I'm only including the URL here. Did that explanation make sense for how we're passing and mapping this data up and down? Okay. Good, good, good. So we're passing down the URL, all of that scraped content. So it's going to run 8 times, get a bunch of scraped content, and pass the URL and that scraped content back up and add it to this like list. And that list is what this output variable is. So we're going to call this all scraped content. And in this case, we also might want to ignore failed runs. Again, you can choose to run it parallel or sequentially. In this case, I don't think it matters all that much. And then we'll leave the retry attempts at 0. So we're mapping that URL. It's scraping the URL, getting it back up, adding it to this all scraped content. And now what we can do is we have this output variable, and in the end block, we want to pass all that scraped content back up to the actual top level, right? So we had this output, and instead of this output, I'm just going to include all scraped content. And I'll include the variable. Actually, I think we called it. Oh yeah, we did call it all scraped content. Okay, great. All scraped content. Make sure we close that to use the value of that. And so now both of the sub workflows are done. All of that is being passed back up into this main workflow, which is all of our research materials. So that includes 3 queries, 8 sites per query of scraped content, right? Okay, any questions here before we move on? No? Great. Okay, that's awesome. Oh, Sandy.
Quick question. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I'm not sure who spoke, but go ahead.
I
Oh,
just
yeah.
wondered, can you have one workflow, can they both pass up to the parent, or the sub just goes to the next sub? Just wondering, for not in here,
The
but
way
in general.
so you can't, so we're in the, sub workflow here. You can't output this and send it straight to the main parent workflow. You
Okay.
have to pass it up to the level sorry. A child can only pass it back to its parent, right? Um, Vanessa.
Oh yeah, just a quick question about your queries. Is it because you put the structured output that you have the dot notation in your like in your variables?
You're saying here in the
No,
research.
in your actual variables. Like if you look in your generate text and you put in a variable, yours has dot notation in it. Is that because you put the structured output?
Sorry,
Like try to add a
here.
variable. Yeah. Anywhere. If you try to add a variable,
Uh-huh.
like say you at the end of results, say you add a variable in your actual prompt.
Mm-hmm. Like if I were to add, you could, oh yeah, you could use dot notation in that prompt as well if you wanted to. But it has to reference the actual value from that JSON. So for example, like I'm getting this result of all of that scraped sorry, all research materials. And so if I were to say all research materials dot whatever's inside of that object, it would just pull, it would follow the path to that particular value. Did that answer your question, or was I
Kind of.
feel?
Um, I noticed that you were automatically creating dot notation. I was asking if that's because you were using structured output, but that was also
Oh yeah,
useful information as well.
yeah. Okay, so let's take a look again. Let's kind of double back to, so what's happening in our Google search block. We ran this one time, and we get all of this from the Google search block, right? We have search Google. It returns this array of results, and it saves all of that to something called this variable called search result. So if we were going to, so that inside of the run workflow block, we know that one item from this input array is the same as this, because this is one item from this list. And so where I'm using dot notation, where it seems like it's out of nowhere, but we're basically saying take this item, this is the whole item, and then we're using dot notation to only access the URL here.
Thank you.
Yeah, did that answer your question, or am I still missing missing the question? Sorry, Vanessa. I want to make sure that your question gets answered. Was that?
It wasn't exactly my question, but it was also useful advice. No, my question was actually, I think it was kind of simple, but I probably made it didn't specify clearly. When you're actually writing a prompt,
Mm-hmm.
like if you're in a generate text block and you're writing a prompt,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so say you write a prompt and you put query in there, like your query variable.
Mm-hmm.
You have queries 0.0, queries 0.1, queries 0.2. I followed what you were doing, but I don't have dot notation in my queries, and I did the structured output. So I was just wondering if I was seeing what I missed in my like how come I don't have
Oh,
the multiple queries like that? I did the
I
comma dot dot dot. Is that because of that, or how are your variables
no, I think
automatically?
that's actually new. Like I've never noticed. Like when I type, that's actually I didn't want to mention it because I'm not sure what it is yet. I know what it represents. So if we do, these double curly braces and I start typing in queries, this is what you're asking about here. Queries dot zero, queries dot one, queries dot two.
Yeah, I didn't see that in mine, so I was wondering how you're automatically generating those queries like that. I was thinking I didn't
Yeah,
do something correctly.
I have no clue why this is showing up because we have not actually generated the queries yet. I think what happens, it might actually be from the sample output. Let's see if comma dot 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 removes that. Let's just double try. That was something new that I noticed as well. So if I type in queries, yeah, So you'll notice that because I have that very specific JSON structure, um, it it's showing the exact structure of the sample output. I wouldn't recommend, so in our run workflow block, you shouldn't use queries.0 because that will only use the first query generated. You want to make sure it's iterating through all of the queries. So just use queries. But you could, if you wanted to, in a different agent, you could theoretically use queries.0 to get the first value from that list.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Okay. Let's go ahead and I think we're about to. Oh, Ken, sorry, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, real quick, you have mock data there in the Google search, but that
Mm-hmm.
workflow is run 3 times, so you just have the same results all 3 times then, right?
Yes, just for the purposes of testing this specific workflow, what I'm basically going to do is with this mock data, run it one time and see if it's able to generate the scraped results correctly, and then we're going to remove the mock data from this workflow here. Yeah. Which is actually a great segue to do just that. So I think we have everything all set up. Let's go ahead and run this specific research flow to make sure that we're getting all of our data back. So we have our query desert survival tips. This doesn't matter as much because we already have this done. It looks like it's sending back the output. You still need to edit this. So let me make sure that I have that correctly here. What happened here? Sorry, 1 second. Okay, let's try this one more time. I think I got the scrape content added correctly. Let's just try this one more time. Oh, weird. For some reason, it is not sending that. Let's delete some tabs here. We'll go into Subscrape and let's just remove this, wait for it to save, and we'll re-add this again. So this was like all content, whatever we wanted to call it, and the value of that was all scraped content. There we go. Now let's run it in the debugger one more time. Oh my gosh, let's try publishing this. Oh, looks like it did not save correctly. That's so weird. Whoa. Good thing we have this recorded. Sorry about that, folks. I'm going to go ahead and clear the mock data. I'm not sure why we have these 2 blocks here. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to refresh the page. We'll test this and then we'll wrap up. Whoa, that is so strange. Okay. Well, we have this recorded. I will send this to Sean. This is like very clearly a bug here. Let's go ahead and just delete this block. Oh my gosh. It's just a random block in here. Okay. We'll go ahead and just re-add a new Google block. Link this back up. Link this back up. We have our query. We want to send our search query in. We want to output search results. And then we want this in JSON. Then we want to iterate through that JSON. We have this scrape workflow where we'll run it multiple times. We have this JSON array input. We know that the input array is search results. And this output variable is going to be all scraped content. We can run it in parallel. We will ignore failed runs. And to get this URL, we know that we want item.url because of the output structure of this search Google block. Okay. There we go. Let's go ahead and publish this. And then instead of including the mock data here, what we're going to do is just take it from the top and answer all of the questions. So let's go ahead and we will go into the main workflow and let's just see the full experience and take a look at what we get back. So I'm going to just add a display content block. And in this case, I am using a display content block because we're interacting with it on the front end and it will be nice to see what we get returned for us. Draft agent. Anybody want to, I'm going to look in chat. Anybody want to type in a topic? Agentic trolls. Not sure if that was part of the topic or if that was in there before, but sure, let's just type that in. We'll see if it comes back with anything. What comes to mind when you think of agentic trolls in the context of online behavior? Sure, let's human trolls using AI tools, most likely to encounter these human trolls on social media platforms. What are your primary concerns about agentic trolls? Ethical implications. Actually, detection methods could be cool. Purpose of your research, policy development. You give an example of agentic trolling. I'm just doing research. Okay, so now it's generating the queries. It generated the queries. It's running the workflow. Let's go back in the debugger and watch all this at work. Okay, so this is all of the user context block. You can see in the debugger in our generate queries section that it generated 3 separate queries. And we can also see that this sub research flow looks like in this case it was working in parallel. But the good news is that it went through, it got all of these queries, and was it able to scrape the text? So it looks like it was able to scrape the text from that particular these particular websites. There we go. That's awesome. So theoretically, once this all finishes, actually, you know what's happening is maybe the Google block, I made the same mistake I made in the video, which is I forgot the Google block was scraping 30 at a time. And how do we know this? Because I ran my sub workflow in sequence. So I can see there's one research flow and there's 30, 29 plus the 0 item scrapes. And now we have the second research and it's also 28 items, 29 items plus a scrape. So we know that that is not it's too many. It's going to overload the agent. Let's go ahead and we'll simply go into advanced options, turn this back down to like 8. And then we can republish this while the old run is still running. What I'm really interested in is, do we get that structured output back? Is it able to work through these sub workflows and give us this large variable back to us? This is also, I understand we're at the hour. So we're gonna, once this finishes outputting, we're gonna pause and we'll continue, hopefully finish the build on Thursday. while we wait, are there any other questions regarding this build, or are the questions, I'm guessing a lot of them are probably for later in the workflow, but just in case, now's the chance to talk through iteration. If you're still needing help with using the item variable, if that double run workflow inside of a run workflow makes sense. Slash, the other question I have is this even helpful to review versus a video? Yeah, Karen, or
Hey,
Hi. Louis, is there a chance for you to just quickly show us how to push that mock data back in again onto one of the blocks? Or can
oh
you
yeah,
not
for
do it
sure.
because it's running?
I'll just get a different, I'll just
Yeah.
start on a different project. Yeah, good question. Yeah, so this mock data is super helpful when we want to, let's just use scrape URL, and we'll use the MindStudio kind of main site here. Or maybe we can have so what we have two features. One is you can create these breakpoints, and breakpoint before essentially will stop it right before the block runs. Breakpoint after will stop it after the block is run. And so I'm going to put after, and we're going to call this content. And when we run this, we can, let's run it one time. We can get some of this sample data and save it for future runs. So you can see here in the debugger of this run that we get all of this sample data, or we get this data back. Now what we can do is, if we want to just use that data later on, we can configure the mock data, and this will allow us to see the previous runs and the last time that this was run. So simply select the run that you want to use as mock data. It'll also show you how it's being saved as a variable as well. And then just hit the save button. And then it'll essentially, every time you test this out, and you hit run workflow, this will be grayed out, and it'll skip over this part and just use the mock data in the place of actually running the block.
And to push it back in again, is it a similar thing? Toggle it back on?
So yeah, well, this will only be for testing. So if you were to publish this agent, it would still run the block on the front end of the agent, or like in the production version of the agent.
Right.
And then to kind of turn the block on for running it in the
I see there,
debugger,
yeah. Clear mock
yeah,
data.
you can just remove the breakpoint and clear the mock data. Yeah.
Cool. Really good. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Did this finish running? Yes, it did. Did we get some data? No, this is this pesky thing that I set up to help me is still appearing here for some reason. So I'll need to look into this. I think it's a bug, some sort of bug. So I'll get back to you all. But we're going to continue this on Thursday. Hopefully the explanations are helpful. And yeah, have a great rest of your day. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. Appreciate it. Okay, have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, Luis. Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Thanks, Louise.
Thanks, Louise.